use the book we just published in Danish. The book is, as you probably know, it's the name Ukrainian Diary. So, welcome to Mr. Kurkov.
Thank you.
As you probably know, Andrey Kurkov is a very famous writer in Ukraine. He is translated to 35 languages, is it right?
37.
37, okay. And published in
65 countries.
65 countries. So it's a really very, very successful writer we have here with us. Andrey is living in Kiev, and the book is we will talk about today is about demonstration in Maidan in Ukraine, as you know. We have decided to the program of this evening will be divided into 3 parts. We will start with the first part will be something about Andrey's writing, how he became a writer, etc. Then we will go to the book and talk about the book. And at last, of course, because it's a very political issue, so we will of course talk also about the political situation in Ukraine today. At last, you will have possibility to ask questions, and of course, buy books. We have the new published book in Danish, and Andrey brought some books in Russian and Ukrainian also. So at last, you can buy, if you want to, buy a book, and I know Andrey is a very kind person, so he will, of course, write something nice in the book for you personally. So, let's go.
Yep.
Yes.
Well, it was your plan and my monologue now, yes? Good evening. Thank you very much for coming here. I'm very sorry I don't speak Danish. And I'm very sorry that we don't have a separate meeting for Ukrainian speakers and Russian speakers, but I hope next time we will organize a separate meetings and a separate meeting maybe even for, I don't know, Finnish readers in Denmark, if they are. But anyway, I will briefly tell you my story because I'm a typical citizen of Ukraine in the sense that I'm of Russian origin. I grew up in Kyiv but was born in Leningrad. My father was military test pilot, my mother was a doctor. And in 1962, very famous and my favorite Soviet Ukrainian politician Nikita Khrushchev, after Caribbean crisis, dismissed from the army 100,000 officers. My father was one of them, and we moved to Kyiv to my grandmother who settled in Kyiv after the war. I do have in my blood Ukrainian blood, probably some Polish blood, a lot of Don Cossacks blood, which is actually, anyway, Russian, yeah. And you know that approximately 17% of Ukrainian population are ethnic Russians. Ukraine is a multicultural state with lots of minorities, more than 100 minorities. Main minorities are Ukrainian Hungarians, 250,000, Crimean Tatars with their language and culture, about 300,000, etc. So it's a very complex and beautiful and very interesting country, which is never stable, and that's why maybe it is very interesting to live there if you are a journalist. And if you're not a journalist, sometimes it is difficult. But anyway, I grew up in Kyiv, and at the age of 7, I wrote my first piece of poetry. The short story of this was that actually I have an older brother who was in the Soviet time dissident, and after Soviet time became a jeweler. As a child, I was quite often left behind in the flat alone, and my father bought me 3 hamsters on the annual market. So that I had somebody to play with. And what happened when I was alone at home, I would let them run around the small flat with 2 rooms. And if somebody was coming back home, I had to catch them and to put them back. They lived not in the cage, they lived in a glass jar. And once I couldn't find one of the hamsters, and my father accidentally killed it with the door. So I was very upset. I decided to be much more responsible with animals. And once I saw a very hungry cat in the street, I decided to take this cat home and feed it with a sausage. When I brought a cat home, the cat jumped from my hands and ate the second hamster. So I didn't manage to save it, and I was completely upset. And I wrote my first piece of poetry about solitude of a hamster who lost his friends. My mother loved this piece of poetry very much. I had to read it very often for her friends. And 1 month later, the last hamster fell down from the 5th floor from the balcony and died instantly. And I wrote a second piece of poetry about Lenin because I knew that Lenin was also dead. And at some point I decided that people were writing poetry only when something horrible happened and only about things which disappeared, either animals or people or love. And anyway, at the age of 13 I started writing political and non-political jokes because of my elder brother, because he was one of a small group of dissidents, and we had a very specific kitchen culture in the Soviet Union. So all the dissidents, or all who wanted to tell secrets to each other, would lock themselves inside the kitchen, produce a bottle of port or vodka, and tell jokes about Brezhnev, Stalin, or somebody else, but also exchange books which were not officially published. And so I was allowed sometimes to listen to the jokes, and I was not given port wine, which was good, I think. And I loved the jokes, and at the same time I discovered for myself a wonderful Russian poet and writer, Danil Harms. Maybe you know, I'm sure he's translated. He's the author of absurdist literature and probably father of black humor in Russian and Soviet literature, who was almost never published. He published only several children's books, and he died of hunger in Leningrad during the war, during blockade. But anyway, I loved his very black and funny stories, and I continued writing poetry and prose. And I mean, I don't want to go along the biographical line, but I mean, I still have in my books a lot of black humor, and some of my novels are described as black comedies. I have special relationship with the Soviet history and with politics, because when my grandfather died in 1980, I found out that he had two brothers who were important communists in the north of Russia, and both were arrested in 1937 and sentenced to 25 years of Gulag. And one survived and then settled in Irkutsk, and actually his grandson found us in Kiev already in independent Ukraine. But in 1980, when I found out part of this story, I realized that I was taught completely wrong history of Soviet Union in the school, and I decided to find out the truth. And at the same time, I was already a student in linguistic university where I had been studying English and French. And we had an American lady professor who gave me as a present dictation machine. It was quite a big, not like today's gadget. And I started traveling in the Soviet Union with this dictation machine, looking for old people who played an important role in the Soviet history. They had a special name. They were the honored or honorable pensioners of Republican or state level. And I found some of them. Some of them wanted to talk to me, some of them not. Then later I realized that those who wanted to talk to me, because I pretended that I'm a journalist, I had to be an actor in this situation. And so the officials, ex-Soviet officials and party members who were dismissed from the jobs by Khrushchev during during anti-Stalinization, they were upset even when they were 85 years old, and they wanted to talk about history, real history. Those who managed to live through life with no problems, they didn't want to tell the truth. So I spent several years actually hitchhiking in the Soviet Union, and even river hiking in Volga region, in White Sea region, and I wrote as the result 5 books about history of Soviet mentality. It is not exactly the books about Soviet history, but it's about life in the Soviet time, including life of politicians and ordinary people. And I'm talking about trilogy. It's like a big novel in 3 volumes, which is called Geography of a Single Gunshot. which starts in 1917 and ends the story in 1974, and two more novels which are touching the Soviet history from 1945 till Caribbean crisis, which I mentioned already because it influenced the history of my family, and the last book, which was already funny, about favorite botanist of Joseph Stalin, Michurin. But I will not talk about these books anymore because they are not translated in Danish. And most of my books are about post-Soviet Ukraine. I was very happy when Ukraine became independent, and I was still quite nostalgic about Soviet Union because I couldn't understand how the borders will function. And does it mean that actually my country became much smaller? But at the same time, I remembered somebody's phrase, I think it's used very often in English language, small is beautiful. Ukraine, of course, not small, it's bigger than France. But at that time, comparing to the Soviet Union, it was small, and I believed it is much easier to build a civilized country on the smaller territory than on the huge, uncontrollable territory. I think I was right, and I believe that Ukraine will become civilized much quicker than big Russia. And I cannot say anything about Russia because what is happening today is not logical for me. It is very strange development when the country happily walks back into the Soviet past with some elements of modernization. So, I mean, probably you can easily be a communist and use Apple Macintosh computer, but somehow, I mean, for me, it is not logical. Anyway, do you have a question?
Yes. Sure.
Please.
Back to your writing.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
You are writing in Russian. Yeah.
Yes,
You
it's my
said-
mother tongue.
Yes, it's your mother tongue.
Yes,
But,
I write novels in Russian. I write essays and articles in English, Russian, and Ukrainian. And I write children's books in Russian and in Ukrainian. But in the last years, my books are published for children only in Ukrainian.
Okay. Yes. And you told me that you are the most translated writer even in Russia.
Not
You're-
I mean, in Russia, I am not published
No,
at
no,
all.
I mean from
but
Russian.
From the Russian language writers at the moment, yes, I have the biggest number of sales abroad.
Yes.
I don't have books on sale in Russia. My books
No.
first were removed from bookshops in 2004 after my engagement in Orange Revolution. In 2006, they were reprinted by another publishing house, Amphora, in Petersburg. And from 2008, my books are not published and not sold anywhere in Russia. And one of the books, The President's Last Laugh, is on the official ban list.
Okay. So it's the reason, the official reason. Do you have any reason?
Well, there are reasons because I was during Orange Revolution. I was contacted by some activists of pro-Russian organizations in Kiev, and they expected me to support Putin and the fight for the Russian language, which is a political issue, not linguistic and cultural issue. If we talk about language, there are no problems for Russian speakers in Ukraine. I was always writing in Russian and had all my books published in Russian, and some of them in Russian and in Ukrainian. And the issue of language was completely artificial, used by, I would say, radical pro-Russian parties as well as radical pro-Ukrainian, just to split the election and to force people to talk about linguistic things, political and linguistic, and not about the future of the country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember I had forgotten to introduce myself. My name is Otta Tiefenbeck, and I am covering Eastern Europe for several Danish media. I have also a website called Mr. East, and it's covering all about Eastern Europe. And first time I met Andrey. It was for an interview for Danish newspaper Kristelig Dagblad. And I remember from this time, you told me, living in Ukraine, it's a dramatic life. If I was living in Denmark, I'm not sure I would get all these ideas I have here. Is it important for you to live in a country where, yeah, I think I can say I was quite surprised that you can change money in a pharmacy in Ukraine. You can find many different things from the life here in Western Europe.
Well, I live in Ukraine not because I'm a writer.
No.
I live in Ukraine because I grew up there and it is my motherland, and Kyiv is my favorite city. And even if it becomes stable, I will stay in Ukraine.
Sure.
Yes.
But how much does it mean for your writings? So.
Well, since I write about Ukraine most of the time, of course, I have more material than time. And generally, I mean, Ukraine lacks 1,000 writers. We don't have enough writers to write about all interesting subjects and details of Ukrainian political, social, and ordinary lives. So it is important. I mean, I can give you an example. During Orange Revolution, some of my friends who are German writers and Italian writers came to Ukraine just to get energy and ideas, because they said that it's so boring in Germany, there is nothing to write about.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the writer's point of view. Of course, if you are an ordinary citizen and you want to have a stable life and be sure that everything will be fine tomorrow, you don't need this instability in the country. But I mean, we are living in the times of changes. And yes, I think it is Chinese proverb that I don't wish you, if you are my friend, to live in the times of changes. But of course, for writers and journalists, it's lots of work when there are times of changes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yes.
I mean, can I ask you a question?
Of course.
Of course, I mean, but I mean, you go to East and you are writing about Eastern Europe. Why?
Yes, it's a good question, but it may be not so funny answer, because I think it's important to show what is going on in this part of the world, because in my eyes, Danish media don't cover that much this part of the world. So it's the reason.
It's the same reason. I mean, in 1992, I had first commercial translations of my novels, and I was asked to learn German to present my books in German language. And I started traveling in Germany, Switzerland, and Austria, thinking that I will be talking about my books. And everywhere where I presented my books, I was asked about President Kuchma, about Chernobyl catastrophe, about corruption, about police. So I became commentator, and probably because of this, I started writing essays and articles about Ukraine, because I think I can explain what's happening, because I live there and I speak some languages. And when journalist comes to Ukraine, especially if he comes first time, of course he looks for a story and he finds something very often superficial, which will fit in a piece of a newspaper. He has 500 words to explain what is happening, and it is impossible.
Back to your writing again. How many novels did you publish?
I published 18 novels. I didn't publish my first 4 novels, and I'm very happy I couldn't publish them at some point. I published 7 books for children, and as a screenwriter, there are about 20 films, 5 feature films, and the rest documentaries, short films, and TV films based on my film scripts.
And the most translated book is
Death and the Penguin. That actually was my first translated book in German. It became long seller. I mean, it's published in 37 languages. And it's a novel about Kyiv in 1995-94, which were very difficult years. I think in a way more difficult economically and morally than now, because people didn't feel the country. They felt that they lived in this space, but there were no laws, there was no police, and the mafia was ruling actually everything. And mafia could defend you if you paid them,
sure,
or could punish you if you don't pay them.
Yes. Okay. Maybe we should move a little bit further to the book.
Yes.
And
yes.
You are in the beginning of the book. You are writing also about this stable life and what does it mean for the story. Can you tell us how did you find out to write this book?
Well, what happened that in 2012 I started writing a novel which is still unfinished, and in the autumn 2013. My Austrian publisher, Heimann Verlag, asked me to write a non-fiction book, collection of essays to explain Austrian and German readers the difference between Russia and Ukraine, the difference between Russian mentality and Ukrainian mentality, Russian history and Ukrainian history. And I had been writing these essays when Maidan started. And actually, on the 21st of November, when Prime Minister Azarov announced that Ukraine is not going to sign association agreement with Europe, I stopped, because suddenly you understand that you don't know what will happen tomorrow, because everyone was already marching toward Europe, not towards European Union membership, but somehow people were thinking that we will be much more associated with Europe economically in the beginning and then maybe politically. And I called my publisher, Markus Hatzer, and I told him that I cannot write anymore these essays. Let's do something else. And from the age of 15, I write diaries. And these diaries are personal, so I never published them before, but I always was writing down what was happening with my family, with my friends, in the country, if I was surprised by something. And I told him that I will be writing diaries anyway about what is happening now. So we can actually publish a book based on the diaries, and then I can incorporate in this book the essays and information which I wrote for the non-fiction book. And what I wrote for the non-fiction book was actually the very important elements of the history of Ukraine, without which you cannot understand what is happening and what is Ukrainian society based on. Like two artificial famines in 1932-33 and 47-48, organized by Stalin. Then this history of Greek Catholic Church. Not many people know about this church, but this church is part of Roman Church, acknowledged by Vatican, and it was banned by Stalin in 1945. And then 5,000 priests of this church, mostly from Western Ukraine, were gathered together for the Congress, and they were given choice to join Russian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate or go to Gulag. And majority went to Gulag, and 3,000 priests died there. Then, of course, the issue of Ukrainian nationalism and history of such personalities as Stepan Bandera or Roman Shukhevich and others. And all these things, I mean, they went into the diaries instead of being published separately. And we agreed that I will write every day what I find out, what I experience, because I live next to Maidan. I live near between Golden Gate and Saint Sophia. So it is 5 minutes walk to Maidan. And I went to Maidan sometimes 3-4 times every day. First, to understand what was happening, especially after 29th of November, when political protests started. And then actually I traveled in Ukraine, also checking on Maidans in smaller towns or in other big towns. And every night or every morning I would write down a piece of this diary and would email it to my translator, Stefan Beilich, in Berlin. And he was translating every day a new piece and sending it to my publisher. And in order not to write artificially sort of diary for publication, I was writing this diary just like I had been writing always, because there were lots of stories with my kids and friends and my wife and in Kiev. And I thought that when the book is ready for publication, I will remove personal stories and I will retain only the political stories or sort of ordinary life of people, because it is not actually a book about barricades or Maidan only. It's actually a book about life during Maidan. Because if you didn't go there during the events, you wouldn't be able to imagine that, for example, under Maidan Square, on which sometimes 500,000 people gathered, underneath there is two-story commercial center with cafes, restaurants, banks, boutiques, etc. And this commercial center was open all the days of the Maidan protests, except for 2 days in February, 21st and 22nd of February, when almost 100 of protesters were killed by snipers. So people actually, Kievites were not only tolerated, they were helping people on the Maidan, because people who settled on Maidan, they were not from Kiev. They came from Western Ukraine, some from Crimea, from Donbass, from everywhere. They brought the tents with them. And on the tents, they would put the name of their town or the name of the region. So it was like headquarters of the protesters from this region. And Kievites were bringing food. Me and my wife were also coming and bringing food them. And you could eat there free of charge, because they were volunteers cooking. You could get free coffee or free tea. And behind barricades, there were coffee machines on the wheels. And there you could buy coffee. And if you wanted comfortable coffee, you would go underneath, under the Maidan, in this commercial center, and then you would pay high price and you would sit comfortably, and you will not hear what was happening up there. So, I mean, it was very special time. And my neighbors were taking every morning their kids to school number 57 on Parisna Street, and the school was 20 meters from the barricades. So, I mean, nobody expected violence, because everybody remembered peaceful Maidan of Orange Revolution. And the evolution from peaceful protest to violence, it's a separate story, and it is also described as was going in the book. So, in fact, we decided with the publisher that on 21st of April will be the last entry, the last text about life during Maidan, and then they will prepare a book to be published in June. Mm-hmm. And the book was published on the 7th of June, but the French publisher decided to publish it before. So I'm very happy that the book is now available in Danish. I don't think it will be reprinted in Russian or in Ukrainian because it is part of history now, but it is not part of deep history, because if you don't know how it was happening at the beginning, you will not understand what is happening and why it is happening today. Because everything, including annexation of Crimea and conflict in Donbass, actually originates from these events which started on 21st of November 2013.
You said that from the beginning you were thinking about to remove your personal stories.
I forgot, unfortunately. I forgot to do it because the events took such a dramatic step that actually I was not thinking anymore about self-censorship or what do I want people to read and what I don't want people to read. In fact, what happened later, that my English publisher removed a lot of episodes connected with my children defending their rights of privacy. And so the only censored edition is an international English edition of Random House.
Yeah. Some of the people who have been reading your book, they told me it's very strong, that it's the stories are together. There are politics and there are your personal stories, your children, and the people understand the political situation that was going on in Ukraine at this time much easier, because it's make it more lively, you know.
Well, it's not only lively, because I mean, if you talk only about politics, politics don't exist apart from people. I mean, a society is influenced by politics, and society can influence the politics. I mean, if, for example, Kiev was against the barricades, there would be no Maidan, because Kiev is a huge city, officially with 3.5 million population, unofficially 5 million. But Kiev supported it because, I mean, there are lots of interesting things maybe which are not included in the book, but previous history, for example, for many journalists was a surprise why during the parliamentary elections in 2012, Kiev, where 70% of people speak Russian, suddenly supported Ukrainian nationalists from Galicia, from Lviv, the party Svoboda. And I mean, and the answer was very easy, because Kiev was, as well as nationalists, against corruption. And they saw that only radical parties can fight against corruption in the corrupt parliament. And when they stopped believing this, they stopped voting for nationalists, and then the last elections in 2014, during these elections, neither of radical nationalistic parties got enough votes to go into parliament. So the society is very dynamic and reacts according to the situation today.
Yes, I see. I remember there is a place in the book when your son is asking about Lenin and Stalin. Well, maybe we were talking about to read it. Yeah.
Well,
so you
I haven't got any more books. But I mean, I wanted to read a piece in Russian, but I will retell this short episode in English, because every morning when I was in Kiev, I was taking kids in a car to the school, and then coming back to the courtyard, leaving the car and going to Maidan. And one day, actually, on the way to the school, my eldest son asked me, "Daddy, who was better, Lenin or Stalin?" And I answered at once, of course, Lenin was better. And he said, why? I said, because he died earlier. And so there are many episodes like this in the book, which are real life episodes today. It's not a book based on political analysis. In fact, actually, very often in the book, I was trying to predict what will happen tomorrow. And almost every time I was false, I was not right. And then I was upset, and when I reread the book, I could see when I was depressed, when I was upset, when I had hope, when I lost hope. I mean, my problem is that I'm psychologically a typical Soviet enthusiastic optimist. It's a medical state, when you believe that everything will end up well. And the first problem with my optimism I had in 1993, when we had practically criminal wars on the streets, and if you had first $100, you would invest them in bulletproof door for your flat. And I mean, we have now, we have with my wife and family bulletproof doors. My parents have bulletproof doors. Even our countryside house has bulletproof doors. And then a friend of mine asked me, are you still this stupid Soviet optimist, or you are finally normal pessimist like everybody else? And I said, no, I am not a pessimist. I am now a black optimist. And the friend said, what do you mean black optimist? And I said, well, that's somebody who knows that everything will be fine, but he is not sure that he will live to this moment. I'm now much more optimistic than during Maidan, I should say, yes, because I think many people would understand that there would be no chance for peaceful protests in Yanukovych's time, because Yanukovych brought his own culture of violence to Kyiv. And he brought not only this culture, he brought thousands of people from Donbass and put them everywhere in important positions. And for example, Lviv, which is cultural capital of Ukraine, beautiful city, Austrian-Hungarian city, you can say, like Lviv, where almost everybody speaks Ukrainian. Suddenly they got a new tax office director or boss, about 30 years old, Russian speaker from Donetsk, who started inviting business people from Lviv one by one, telling them how much they should bring every month in cash. And of course, Yanukovych never learned Ukrainian history or Soviet history. He didn't know probably what was happening in Galicia from 1945 till 1961. For 15 years, there was partisans' war against communist regime, against not only communist but NKVD, KGB, Soviet army. And there were partisans in the woods, sometimes also killing the teachers who were sent from other regions of Ukraine or from Russia to teach Russian language in the village schools. These were very dramatic years, but for 15 years this war was going on. And so, one could understand what would happen if the situation like this one, with Russian speaker, guy from Donetsk, completely corrupt, sent to extract money from Ukrainian speaking business people. And in Lviv it has different culture. These people who were annexed by the Soviet Union from Poland in 1939 according to Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. They lived only 40 years under the Soviet regime. So this is a different value of freedom for them. So they wouldn't tolerate it. And I think this is why most of people who came as first to Maidan in November and December 2013, they were from Galicia, from Western Ukraine. And they were ready to fight, I think. But it's interesting because many people think that Ukrainian nationalists, they come only from the West. But the famous and notorious radical group Right Sector came from the east of the country. It was organized in Dnipropetrovsk region. And the head is from Dniprodzerzhinsk, small industrial town. And half of them are Russian speakers and ethnic Russians. And for them, the issue of language is not important as for the nations from the Western Ukraine. So, it's a country with very complex history and very complex today's situation. But I would say that the country with huge potential to become normal, civilized European state. I'm not talking about membership in EU. This is, if it happens, it will happen after many, many years of reforms and changes. But generally, I would say that in 5 years, economically Ukraine could catch up with Bulgaria and Poland, maybe with Poland later.
Yeah. Back to Maidan. You said you have 3 kids and you live quite close to Maidan. Wasn't you afraid? Several places in the book, your relatives in England and friends ask you to move and to come, and
not my
you
relatives,
refuse.
but my wife is English.
Yes.
And she got a call from her sister. She has 4 sisters and 2 brothers, asking her to come to take family and go to England. But I said no. But she said also no, we are not going. I prepared. We have a countryside house 1 hour drive from Kiev, and I prepared this house for evacuation. We had some difficult moments. I mean, like once, I think it was beginning of February. My daughter was alone at home, and the flat was blocked by people in black. 3 or 4 people were standing and ringing the door and demanding that she opens, and she was horrified. She called me on the phone, asked what to do. I was actually in Ukrainian house, which was headquarters of volunteers of Maidan, of Samooborona, self-defense. And we were actually preparing a discussion about social and political issues there. There is another thing about the role of intellectuals, if they did have influence or not. And so I was shocked. Of course, I didn't know. I said, just don't open the door. And as I told you, the door is bulletproof, so you cannot just easily break it. And somebody noticed that I am very upset and came up to me, and I explained what happened. And immediately a guy, Sergei, who was the head of the security of Maidan, of outer Maidan. This was a separate group of drivers who were protesting, and they were blocking the police sometimes by their cars. And he said, let's go quickly. And we got into the car, rushed to my house, and he said, you said stay in the car. He was a huge guy, like almost 2 meters. And he rushed with another friend of his up the stairs to the 4th floor where we live. And then he came down. We waited quite a long time, because what he had done, he had a camera. So he rushed up and he took photos of the faces of this man and passed the camera to the second man, who went down. And then he said that now they will do nothing because we can identify them through Facebook. And this was the way how to fight against so-called titushki, so hired bandits or hired sportsmen who were asked by official police to go and to beat up and sometimes to kill protesters. And so, this Sergei, he stayed and was talking to this man, asking them what they are doing and who they are. They never answered, but he came later down and said that he will do nothing now because we have their photos. And they were staying, I think, 1 more hour just next to my door before leaving. I don't know until today who they were. So, I mean, I think I had only one situation like this, but I know friends who were harassed many times. And even, for example, very famous and probably known here, Ukrainian singer Ruslana Lizhechko. Ruslana, who won a Eurovision contest some years ago. I mean, she was very active on the stage of Maidan, and she couldn't go home. Her house is in Lysniki village. It's just 15 kilometers from Kiev on Odessa way. And the house was blocked by people just in normal clothes and cars without number plates. And she was afraid to come home. So she was sleeping with friends. So there was invisible war on every level. And sometimes it was dangerous, especially for people of Maidan, because in fact, as I said, they were not from Kiev, so many of them did not know Kiev very well. They were for the first time sometimes in the capital, in the historic city, and they wanted to see the monuments in the night, etc. And the perimeter of Maidan was guarded by the security of Maidan. And the people were told not to go anywhere in the night, especially alone. And some did go. And for example, when I went several times in the night to Maidan when I was coming back, I was stopped by 3 or 4 people, adult people, very sort of, I would say physically strong, obviously. And they were asking me how to find a very tiny street in the center. And of this street, only local people could be aware. So they were checking if I am local or not, because no tourist would know this street. And I remember how they were watching me when they asked me about Georgievsky Переулок, a small street behind Saint Sophia. And I told them where to go, and they still waited, looking at me. So I understood they didn't need this street, but then they left. They went somewhere else. And then when I found out that after Maidan, 300 protesters disappeared, they were missing, they were not found. I understand some of these people were stopped in the night time by this kind of bandits patrols or bandits on the service of Yanukovych patrol and taken away. And then now we have about 60 or 70 people unaccounted for. But many of people who disappeared, they were found later dead in the forests around Kyiv or somewhere else. So, I mean, it looked peaceful sometimes on Maidan, but generally it was not really a peaceful situation for Kyiv.
Yes. How was in the book you write a lot about your summer house in Lazarivka. How was the situation there? What do people think about Maidan? And,
well, I should probably mention this, that while we had Maidan, there was also anti-Maidan gathering near Ukrainian parliament. And these people were officially defenders of Yanukovych party and Yanukovych regime. And these people were brought from different cities around Ukraine by buses. The buses were paid by the government at that time. They were paid every day, sometimes 100, sometimes 200 hryvnias. So they were like on the payroll. And they had to stay there and from time to time for television to talk about that Ukraine needs stability but not Europe. Ukraine should become first rich and independent financially and then should approach Europe, etc. So it was used for propaganda. And in the beginning, many people thought that all these people are from Donbass because during Orange Revolution, miners from Donbass were brought to Kyiv by trains, and they were paid also lots of money, and they had to stay they stayed at that time in European Square, but they were sleeping in the trains which were stationed on the railway station. Yeah, and this time I thought also in the beginning that all these people who defend Yanukovych they are brought from Donbass. But then I found out that 30 people from my village in Zhytomyr region, which is to the west from Kyiv, are going every two days on a bus to Kyiv to take part in this anti-Maidan. And in fact, I found out that every district government had a plan how many people they should send to anti-Maidan protests. So our nearest town is called Brusilov. And Brusilov was supposed to bring every day 180 people. They were promised 400 hryvnias. For protests, they were paid 100 because the transport was deducted, something else was deducted. And 30 people from my village, and the village is not big, probably 500 people, they were participating in anti-Maidan protests. And one lady, actually one single mother, wanted to go to take part in the protest together with a 7-year-old son in order to get double pay. And the boss on the bus said that we don't take children. So she got upset and she said, I will not go. And after Maidan was over, after Yanukovych was already in Moscow, she said that she refused to go to Maidan because she was for Maidan, to anti-Maidan because she was for the revolution. So, I mean, I think even if we talk about Western Ukraine, there were people who came to participate in anti-Maidan from Western Ukraine. Sometimes they were civil servants, sometimes they were teachers, and they were afraid to refuse because then they could be dismissed, they were blackmailed. So most of people were probably just forced to go, but some people went in order to earn some money. And we shouldn't think that 100% or even 80% of Ukrainians or Danes are politically engaged and know what they want. So for many Ukrainians, it was not clear what was happening. They didn't know what is better, Yanukovych or not Yanukovych. And some of them did go to anti-Maidan. Some of them later went to Maidan, but it's always a tiny minority which decides what to do and influences the situation during a revolution or protests. So the protests were supported, I think, by majority of Ukrainians in the end, but started by maybe 1% of the population.
So then we can maybe continue to the political situation today. So it's now nearly 2.5 years ago, nearly, since Maidan demonstration started. What do you think about? Was it worth it?
Well, I would probably rephrase your question. Was it possible to avoid Maidan?
Mm.
Well, if we didn't have Maidan, and of course when it was started nobody thought about violence, Ukraine had 100% chances of becoming Belarus #2. Because nobody in Europe asked a question why completely corrupt Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych, who was also Russian speaker and very pro-Russian, although he was not pro-Putin, he was pro-Yanukovych, pro-himself. Why suddenly on 26th of September he decided that we will go to Europe now, when his political party, Party of Regions, was advocating friendship and trade with Russia, new status or official status for the Russian language, etc. And I think the answer is that by announcing change of the politics, he wanted to blackmail Putin into giving more money for the Ukrainian budget. Because in the last 2 weeks before Vilnius summit, Yanukovych had 4 or 5 meetings with Putin, 2 or 3 public and 2 non-public. And in the end, Putin decided to give him 33, I think, billion euros or dollars, because Ukraine was already robbed of budget money by the government of Yanukovych. Because the dream of Yanukovych was to become more rich than Putin. And actually he was sure that he will be president for a long time, and then he would pass presidency to his son Alexander. So the choice was either to become a country of Lukashenko #2, and of course before that he was trying to curb freedoms, because Ukraine is very different from Russia. I mean, you cannot have one political party in Ukraine, one political party system. Russia came back to the Soviet system. They have only governments of Putin's party. Everything else is like addition to the same ideology. Ukraine has more than 200 political parties registered. It's not a positive thing, but it shows the different tradition. Ukraine was never a monarchy. Russia was a monarchy, and the collective mentality of Russian and before Soviet people actually needs one Tsar. That's why the resurrection of the cult of Stalin now. And that's why now Putin is not really a president, he is Tsar. And he will remain in power until he is very ill or dead, or if suddenly we find out that he has a son. But there is no other way. In Ukraine, Ukraine has a tradition of anarchy. For me, 16th century Ukraine, with Cossacks around, with no money printed, but with independent huge territory, with flexible borders. This is a typical example of territory control by the power, and this power doesn't want to become a state, because there were courts, but the courts were military. There was election of military leader who was called Hetman, but there was no Tsar. And every time a new Hetman was elected, there were intrigues to remove him and to announce new elections. It's the same what we have now. So this is because of this tradition. I mean, we have 200 political parties. Because of this tradition, we had on 25th of May 2014 presidential election in which President Poroshenko receives in first round 54% of the vote, and next day people who voted for him are unhappy and saying that he hasn't done anything in the first 3 hours of his presidency. So, I mean, the reason for this conflict in Donbass, in fact, is that the border between Soviet collective or Russian collective mentality and Ukrainian individualistic mentality doesn't coincide with the border between Russia and Ukraine. 10 years ago, this border was cut in Ukraine into half. In last 10 years, the individualistic mentality border moved to the east. And if there were no conflicts, I think in 10 years' time, the border of mentality would coincide with the border of state or between Russia and Ukraine. But that would be probably too late for Putin. And I mean, annexation of Crimea was first an impulsive punishment of Putin to Ukraine for lack of desire to be again one state or one set of states. And then I think if we're talking about possible plans, I think, but I'm sure there was a plan to have pro-Russian uprisals in 8 regions from Donbass to Odessa. And in fact, there were revolts, pro-Russian revolts, and attempts to take over administration buildings in Nikolaev, in Mariupol, in Kherson, but on a smaller scale. In Kharkov, it was very serious, and only there, actually, the Ukrainian government reacted on time, because more than 26 buses with Russian nationalists came from Belgorod, bringing activists of the RNE, Russian National Unity, nationalistic organization, which is officially banned in Russia. But one of them put Russian flag on the regional administration building and took a selfie and put it on Facebook and Vkontakte, and was very proud without thinking that he shows who is behind all these events. And thanks to one oligarch who is still quite powerful, Kolomoisky, this plan didn't work, because Kolomoisky is the, I would say, the owner of Dnipropetrovsk region. And Dnipropetrovsk region is between Donbass and Odessa, but much more close to Donbass, because Dnipropetrovsk border, region border is on the border with Donetsk region. And here, I mean, we come to this conflict, which is probably 60 years old, conflict between Donetsk elite and Dnipropetrovsk elite. Because Donetsk was industrial center, industrial region, with a high rate of crime, with tradition of violence, with lots of resettlers from different regions of Ukraine and Russia, lots of miners, and very strange and very military hierarchy. So if boss says something in Donetsk, you have to do it or you will be punished physically. And then Jewish, Armenian, Ukrainian, Russian region of Dnipropetrovsk, where a lot of intellectual factories were based, including defense factories, a lot of research institutes, and both cities, both regions in the Soviet time were competing who will send their politicians to make career in Moscow, in the Central Committee of the Communist Party. And Dnipropetrovsk would always win. You know name Leonid Brezhnev, the head of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. He was from Dnipropetrovsk. You know Yulia Tymoshenko, who is from Dnipropetrovsk. Turchinov from Dnipropetrovsk. Tigipko, and a lot of people. So Dnipropetrovsk always won, and Dnipropetrovsk never would allow Donbass people come and control their region. And so Kolomoisky, who was number 2 oligarch in Ukraine, actually created with his own money private army which was defending the Dnipropetrovsk region border from Donbass separatists, and they stopped actually this expansion from Donbass.
So, and what about today? Ukraine has no government just now.
No, it has government.
Yes, there's government,
it has troubles.
But it has a lot of troubles,
Yeah.
and the coalition doesn't exist any longer.
No, it exists.
But
Well, I read well, as any Ukrainian, I'm checking news several times every day to be sure that I'm aware what is happening and where is my country now.
There are 2 parties to elect the coalition, right?
Yes, but 3 parties are remaining. But if one more party leaves the coalition, then the coalition doesn't exist. But probably, first of all, I should say that 2 weeks ago we had a serious crisis when the cabinet of minister was so unpopular that one of the party remaining in the coalition was about to leave, because the leaders of other political parties, they thought that now a good moment to restart political battle, to make career or to go for the extraordinary parliamentary elections. I mean, the main politician who wanted these elections and who doesn't want coalition to exist is Yulia Tymoshenko. Because she was well prepared for the new battle. She changed her hairstyle, she changed her clothes, she became much more fit, and she was talking about in the parliament about new elections. What would happen if if there is no coalition, then parliament has 30 days, according to the Ukrainian constitution, in order to create new coalition, and at that time the cabinet of ministers is working, but as a temporary cabinet of ministers, right, not official. And then the new coalition should elect new ministers. But if they don't do it, president has a right to announce new parliamentary elections. And that probably was the hope of Yulia Tymoshenko, because then she would compete. She was one of two best populists in Ukraine who are in the parliament. The second one is Oleg Lashko, who created radical party of Oleg Lashko. And in a way, he is, I think, even more popular maybe now, because the old ladies who were voting for Tymoshenko, they somehow they vote very easily for this young man because he looks so nice and he is promising them lots of unrealistic things. And so, in any case, if she would get majority, for example, by any chance, and she is very talented, then she would demand extraordinary presidential election. So, the whole chaos would stop the country for 2 years, would stop IMF and World Bank and other organizations to give money to Ukraine for the changes, for the reforms. And that would mean probably another 10 years or 7 years lost for Ukraine. So I'm very happy it didn't happen, but until 15th of March we should receive a new prime minister, because I'm not sure, but I think that 15th of March is the deadline given to Ukraine by European Union or by somebody else to change very unpopular today Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think it will happen. I don't know who will become.
So what is your expectation?
Well, I don't know how well are you aware of personalities in Ukrainian politics, but we have several foreigners in the government now. They took Ukrainian citizenship because you cannot work as an American, as a minister in Ukraine. So we have or American citizen with Ukrainian passport, Natalia Yareska, who is finance minister, and who is actually investor or bank or investment consultant with a very long CV, working in Ukraine for more than 15 years. She is one of the candidates to become prime minister. The second candidate is today's parliament speaker, Vasily Grossman, who used to be mayor of big city Vinnytsia, which is connected with President Poroshenko. So I think there is some doubt, because if he becomes prime minister, Poroshenko will be accused that he is promoting his old friends. Yes, and I know that ex-prime minister of Poland, who was responsible for economical reforms many years ago, Balcerowicz, was asked to come and to become Ukrainian citizen. And in the beginning he said maybe or yes, and I think today or yesterday he said finally no.
Correct?
Yes, and I think he is right, because he doesn't know much about today's Ukrainian situation. He knows economically what is happening, but he doesn't know personalities. And today's war between the old system and the new system is very difficult, because people who were working in different ministries or as civil servants for 15, 20 years, they know each other. They are interconnected. They don't want any reforms. They found many years ago the ways how to earn money illegally, how to make budget less rich and less effective. And so far, the biggest reform with positive effect was the police reform, because it was easy to dismiss 100% of petrol police and traffic police and enroll new, young, hopefully honest people, give them higher salary, and they are now controlling the situation in 15 cities in Ukraine, and every month there are 2 or more new cities where newly trained new police is taking charge of the control of the roads and on the streets. But we have very big problems with courts, with legal system, because most of the judges, I wouldn't call them honest, soft to say. And the prosecutors, the same situation. The prosecutor's office should be changed probably 100%, but you cannot find on the street lawyers who will immediately be ready to take jobs as important as job of regional or local or state prosecutors.
Yes.
So we are facing a lot of problems, but I hope that two elements of pressure which are existing now, they will help Ukrainian politicians to be more decisive, because Ukraine did all the positive changes always only under the pressure from European Union or United States. And now we have very serious and sometimes dangerous pressure inside the country from the radical groups and from the activists and volunteers who fought in Donbass, who came back, who lost their friends there, and they are now feeling that like they have right to judge if the country is moving in the right direction or not. And some of them, unfortunately, bring in grenades and weapons to their villages from Donbass. And we have a lot of accidents with these people who, I mean, they are not actually responsible for their actions sometimes, because once you were at war and you spent months firing at people and being fired at, I mean, you are not really, you need probably several years to become normal again. So, I mean, this radicalism is another pressure, and this pressure is taken seriously, I think, by President and by some of the ministers. And if in the old times, Ukrainian parliamentaries were proud to have a badge of member of parliament on their jackets, now very often when they leave parliament, they hide this, they take off these badges not to be attacked by some radical babushkas or radical activists. So it's a very shaky time to make political career.
One more thing about, I think if you say Ukraine, a lot of people would think about Maidan, they would think about Yulia Tymoshenko, Yushchenko,
Yeah.
and they will also think about corruption.
Yes.
Can you tell us how big problem is it for you
Well,
as a citizen, or how big problem is it generally?
Before I went to South Africa last September, I thought that Ukrainian corruption is the best.
Okay.
Now I know everything about President Zuma and African National Congress, and I spent 9 days talking to South African politicians. Now I know that we are not the best. And I hope we will not fight for this right to be the country of corruption number one. In fact, I mean, the grassroots corruption is much less now than it was in Kuchma's time. So already from 2005, you had a choice. For example, if you are driving on the road and you are stopped by traffic, village policemen, who in Kuchma's time could enter the shop and take ice cream for his kids free, without paying. So, I mean, this tradition is gone. The most dangerous corruption, of course, is connected with business, because some business people, they are used not to pay customs fees or taxes and to pay smaller bribes instead. And the fight is going on somewhere, but not everywhere. I can give you an example which I find positive and interesting, but at the same time it's showing the challenge Ukraine is facing. I mean, we have another foreign, very outstanding man and populist, Mikhail Saakashvili, ex-president of Georgia. He agreed to be governor of Odessa. He's very good. I think he's better populist and more sympathetic than Tymoshenko. But I mean, apart from populism, he started fighting local corruption, openly saying that he is breaking the rules and the laws sometimes, because otherwise you can do nothing. And in Odessa, Odessa is a very rich region. Without roads, roads were destroyed, and the money to repair roads were stolen many times. So you don't have roads there. You have directions. And at the same time, the biggest commercial port, seaport, is situated in Odessa. And of course, half, if not more, of the goods imported by Ukraine are coming through seaport and through Odessa customs. And what Saakashvili did, actually, he pushed the new law through parliament about electronic declaration of goods coming from European Union and civilized countries into Odessa port so that the customs officers would know what is in each container before container lands in the docks. And he replaced the personnel. That was the main issue. And they started actually charging the real customs fee for real products. Because before that, for example, a container of TV sets from Japan was registered as container of toilet paper from Hungary. And it's not a question that Hungary doesn't have access to the sea. Nobody cared. And so when Saakashvili introduced this system, a lot of importers redirected their goods, their containers, to Kherson port and to Nikolaev port, where there is no Saakashvili. And the number of containers decreased, I don't know, 2 times or 40%, but the customs fees, which were collected by customs in Odessa seaport, went up 200 or 300%. So logically, Ukraine needs 2 more Saakashvilis for 2 other ports. But I mean, Ukraine needs a lot of honest people, maybe with not much experience, who are prepared to face this system and prepared to fight to change it. Because when, I think the first day the reform took place in Odessa seaport, somebody, a businessman who wanted to be honest, but who had always to pay bribes in the port, who is importing nuts from somewhere. I don't know which, cashew nuts or other nuts. But so anyway, he paid officially the fee. He took his container on a truck and he went somewhere, and 50 kilometers from Odessa on the road, his truck was blocked by people again in black, by the cars, and it turned out to be that some of them were old policemen from Kiev, sent by somebody from Kiev to stop this container and to demand more cash from the driver and from the owner of the company. And he managed to send an SMS to Odessa, and Saakashvili sent new police to this place, and this new police deblocked, freed the car, and sort of pushed away these unknown personalities. And the businessman managed to take his goods where he wanted them. So you see, all the local corruption has some kind of roof and protection in Kiev. And these people who are protecting corruption in Kiev, they are still working in different ministries, and they are sabotaging the changes which are introduced by the new minister. So, I mean, that's why Minister of Economics, Abramovich, in the end resigned. He couldn't do anything. He is too European. He cannot break the rules. He cannot break the laws. He cannot shout. He cannot dismiss people or just send them somewhere far away. And this is the problem with the foreign, I would say, professionals working for Ukrainian government, because they have to deal with the old system and they are not used to it. They don't know how dangerous these people can be. But I mean, we had the same situation in health ministry, where the Georgian minister Kvitashvili actually wanted to resign already a year ago, and then he was asked to stay, and he is still minister, but I'm not sure he is fighting with the system. I mean, what was positive that the presidential administration allowed some volunteers to go and to become auditors or workers of some ministries responsible for expenditure of the ministries. And for example, the defense ministry got several volunteers who were over checking actually how much money defense ministry was spending on food for soldiers, etc. And this was also very difficult. But for the first time in Ukrainian history, one volunteer was asked by the president to become the governor of Lugansk region, Georgy Tuka. And he was a businessman. He's very tough. He learned how to be tough, even more tough there, because it is a front line. And he didn't resign. It is dangerous for him. He was banished many times. He was promised to be killed. But he is still there, and he is still trying to change the situation to the better. So, I mean, we are at war. And this war is not only on the front line between separatists and Ukraine, where every day somebody is killed and somebody is wounded, but it is also in Kyiv, in the different ministries and in different offices.
Yes. time is running very quickly, so I think we have
For
to
Ukraine
take yes, it was my other question.
Yeah.
So what is the future of Ukraine, and what could Europe do for you? It's no secret that the European community has a lot of troubles now with the crisis, with refugee crisis, and so on. What should we do to help Ukraine?
Well, you should try to understand what is happening, and you should understand that no quick changes are possible in Ukraine. But slow changes are on the way, and in this sense, I mean, you should help, but you should control everything. I mean, like, I don't know what happened to the idea of was it United Nations or European Parliament in Brussels wanting to set up their own anti-corruption bureau in Ukraine to overlook the expenditure of the European money in Ukraine.
Yes.
But anyway, every credit, every sum of money sent from Europe should be also checked by the same European specialists how it is used, and there should be permanent pressure on Ukrainian politicians, especially those in control, so that they felt that they are transparent, that Europe, European Union, and other international bodies are checking everything and they are aware of all the processes. Because this is an old Ukrainian tradition. If you want Ukraine to move forward, you shouldn't forget about Ukraine.
Right.
Yeah.
So you are. You said in the beginning that you are optimistic of personal nature. So you are also optimistic about the Ukraine future.
I'm an optimist. Because one more issue is that the new generation of Ukrainians, and I'm talking about millions of young people, they don't agree to live in the old system. I mean, we have approximately 100,000 Ukrainian students in European universities. More than half will come back. Actually, the other students which were studying in Poland, Hungary, and other countries, they came back. They want to be business people. They went actually even to work for the government, although the salary is very low. But they don't want their country to be Belarus or South Africa. So in this sense, it's a question of patience. It's a question of new generation taking over the important positions of the civil service from the old generation.
Yes.
And the question of punishing people who are corrupt and not letting them go just with a gesture that you shouldn't do it again. And that happens also.
I think we will stop here. It's
It's
a nice end of our discussion, and then we can open for the questions here. Yes.
Thank you very much. I say, Raida, and you are the president of the Ukrainian Council. You must be very well acquainted with working conditions of the administration for rights and journalists in Ukraine. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Well, I'm vice president of Ukrainian Parliament, not president. The conditions of, I mean, we have, Ukraine never had real censorship. This is one issue. The danger for journalists was there always until recently, and the journalists sometimes were killed or wounded when they were trying to investigate different issues. It doesn't happen today, but at the same time, a lot of people with no education decided to become journalists. So we don't have really high standards for all the journalists, but I would say that journalists are one of the important forces which is showing what is happening in the country. And the internet is used so much now to uncover corruption and to publish the documents they find. Unfortunately, even when there are documents and there are proofs that somebody from officials is corrupt, the official corrupt judges are not taking right decisions. Yeah. But the journalism is remaining very important in Ukraine. Writers are very active as public figures, and we have a problem with Donbass, even with the territories which are under control of Ukraine, because people there are still under influence of propaganda of Russian television. And the writers and some journalists are regularly going there to start public discussions about social issues, political issues, etc. So I would say that in 2013, when I stopped writing my novel, many Ukrainian writers also stopped writing fiction and started writing blogs and essays about the situation in the country.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you for a lot of good information. I have a question. From your opinion, what was the single most important event happening during the Maidan uprising? It took weeks until it tipped in benefit of the demonstrators. What happened that tipped it? I remember that after some special police force were firing to shoot and kill demonstrators, something happened. And recently I saw in a documentary that there was a man, he said that he was responsible, that he had a gun with him and he began to shoot the policeman.
Well, there are many glory hunters in Ukraine, and everybody wants to be responsible for the revolution. In fact, what was happening that the protests were going peaceful for weeks and weeks, and for some young people, especially for those who were trained in the Dnipropetrovsk region to fight against police, it was too boring, and they knew that Maidan people wouldn't like to use barricades on Maidan for engaging police in the battle. So I'm talking again about now So group and the right sector, which was completely unknown before that. And they built separate barricade on the Grushevsky Street, European Square, cutting the road which leads to Cabinet of Ministers and Parliament. And they were trying to engage police in the battle. They were throwing Molotov cocktail, but they were very clever and they were, as I said, trained. So they would start this battle with police and they would disappear, and those who came from Maidan because it was boring there would remain under the bullets and under the trenches of the police. And their two first victims of protests were killed. So Sergei Nigayan, Ukrainian Armenian from the Dnipropetrovsk region, and Zhizhnevsky, citizen of Belarus, but member of Ukrainian nationalistic organization. And I think the right sector, they believed that without physical fight with police, you cannot change the situation. So I think they were engaging Berkut and soldiers in the battle. And you mentioned the man whose name is Andrey Kurkov, who gave an interview that he was shooting at the police from the Philharmonic, from the conservatory actually on Gorodetsky Street, yes. But he was shooting actually when already they were killed people and wounded people. And the people from right sector, they acknowledged recently they had weapons, they had guns, but very little guns. And definitely they used them already when the first victims appeared. And if we are talking about the moment when Yanukovych did meet with Klitschko and Yatsenyuk and almost agreed with them, or agreed with them actually in presence of European ambassadors, that he will announce extraordinary presidential elections in December 2014. When this became known, then another activist from Maidan, Viktor Parasyuk, who is now irresponsible member of Ukrainian parliament, he jumped on the stage and asked everybody to go and to storm administration of the president. So it was clear that there will be no peaceful solution already.
Yes, hello. I would like to ask you two questions. What are the results after the investigation, after the shootings on Maidan, and also what are the results from the fire in the Union House in Odessa? This is not resolved, I think.
I don't think there are still official reports published or ready. Regarding shooting in the Maidan, there are lots of controversial issues, including the video footage of a sniper who is standing on the roof and shooting first at the protesters and then shooting at the police. So there are lots of things which are not clear, and I am not sure we will find out exactly what and how everything was happening in the nearest future. Almost the same as about Odessa. What is more or less clear that people took refuge in this building not purposely. They were asked by the same group to go there and to run upstairs. Then the fire was started by Molotov cocktails, definitely, yes. And but if you check there is a documentary showing that first there was attack on pro-Ukrainian football fans leaving the match, and then more fans joined these pro-Ukraine fans and started chasing pro-Russian activists. And then pro-Russian activists ran into this trade union house. But before that, 2 or 3 Ukrainian activists were shot at with guns. So there are people arrested and under investigation who are accused of being involved in this tragedy, but I don't think any sentence was passed.
Yes, and the same question is, you talked about this individualistic mentality in Ukraine versus collective in Russia, and you said that it was moving towards the east slowly. What about the region in Russia, the Kuban, where there's a lot of Ukrainian minority people? How are they, their mentality? Is that more Russian collective, or is it Ukrainian?
I mean, they came there as Cossacks, you know, in Kuban, yes, but in the end they were given a lot of privileges by Catherine the Great, and they became people who were allowed to have weapons and who were supposed to defend Russian border from the Caucasian peoples. So they became Russian patriots 300 years ago. And the same, I mean, you know, there are several million Ukrainians in Russia, and majority of them are representatives of Russian society. They are Russian patriots. They are loyal to Russia and to Putin.
In your opinion, what's the future of Crimea?
The future of Crimea for the next several years is very gray, because it will remain unrecognized occupied territory of Ukraine and recognized as part of Russia, which means that there will be no foreign investment, there will be no international transfer, there will be no international banking. The banks of Russia, who, if they start working there, they will be actually blocked from working in Europe or in other countries. That's why in Crimea there are special banks created which don't exist anywhere else, and there are filials of Abkhazian banks and other banks. So there is no money to develop. The development fund, which was promised by Surkov and by Putin 2 years ago, and which I think they promised 14 billion euro or dollars, it was not created because there is not enough money now for this. The situation economically is poor, but I think after Putin is gone, there will be probably talks with the help of the United Nations, and I don't think Crimea will go back to Ukraine, but it will be announced somehow independent territory, probably with still Russian forces stationed there, but with Ukrainian citizens being able to recover their property which they lost, including business property. And there is a huge question which will be important for years and years, the question of legality, because all the documents which were like property documents, business documents, and all the documentation of people during Ukrainian times, they remain legal. But from March 20th of 2014, all the documents who are issued by Russia, all the property documents like selling the flats, etc., they are considered by international law illegal and void. So there will be lots of problems for many years to come. But this is my opinion. There is an idea by somebody that after some years, Ukraine can agree with Russia that Ukraine is renting Crimea out to Russia for 99 years, and then when everybody is gone, including Putin, it will be a problem of the future presidents of Ukraine and Russia. Something what happened to Alaska. But I don't think it is realistic.
I'd like to ask, what do you think about President Poroshenko as president, as politician, because we know that is obviously, according to the Ukrainian constitution, he's the one who has the biggest power. So what do you think, is he doing well enough, or what could be done better?
Well,
What would you
yes.
do in this place? Because we all know that he's also a very rich person, maybe some question of conflicts of interests, or so is it doing well enough just what will corruption just to start from? Or
Well, I think he's the best positive president of Ukraine today. I don't see any other candidate who could be better than him. He probably could be more brave, or there could be more pressure put on him by the civil society. But I understand the problems that the country is at war, and so the budget for the Ministry of Defense is now 10 times more than it was in Yanukovych's time. There are lots of social problems and economical problems. And of course, we don't have new political elite. And the old political elite, including Tymoshenko, they are still thinking that political career for them is more important than the future of the country. Is Poroshenko a rich man? I doubt it, because I know about some banks being very unhappy about him not paying credits back. I know that he didn't want to become politician in Yanukovych's time. He wanted to stay industrialist and producer of chocolates and buses. But by blackmail, practically, Yanukovych forced him to be one of the government's faces, to show the West that there are civilized faces in the Ukrainian government and there are people who can speak English. So I don't think he can easily sell now his chocolate factory or whatever he has now, because, you know, with economical crisis, not only the prices of property and assets carry down, but also the investors disappear. And we don't have any foreign investors at the moment, and those who were working in Ukraine, they are leaving even today, and they will come back only when the situation is stable. So I'm probably more pleased about him than unhappy about his actions. So I don't believe if he is replaced by, for example, Yulia Tymoshenko, we will have more positive development. In fact, I'm afraid the development will be quite more negative.
You mentioned one major difference between Russia and Ukraine, that the Russians sort of need a longing for a Tsar, a strong person. So that when the Soviet Empire collapsed, they got a new Tsar. And Ukraine, we said, is more like anarchy, 200 parties, and a tradition of always rebelling against a new leader.
Yeah.
I know that at least two anarchists were among the dead at Maidan. Have you ever studied next year we have the 100 years anniversary for the revolution, the Bolshevik revolution, and the real Soviet revolution. In Ukraine, there was a specific side show, a special version of the revolution. It was the anarchists. It was called Gulaya Poland at that time.
Yes, I can tell you a lot about it.
The leader was Nestor Makhno, and they fought for up to 2-3 years, and they fought against the White Army and the Red Army. Have you studied that? Has that ever caught your interest?
Well, I studied it. I mean, I love history, but this is another proof that Ukraine traditionally is the anarchy, because the biggest anarchic army in the world was organized by Nestor Makhno in 1918, and it had 150,000 soldiers. And they were fighting against everybody, just keeping the Poltava region to themselves. And then in the end, actually, he made a mistake and he started fighting together with Red Army against the White Army, etc. Yes, but I mean, this anarchism is also connected with disrespect for authority, and this comes from the tradition of freedom loving. So I mean, for Ukrainian, it can be very difficult if we get a new political elite and we get honest politicians. It will be difficult to change mind and suddenly to respect the politicians, because Ukrainians are very emotional. They love politicians. I mean, people love Yushchenko. They still love Tymoshenko, but it doesn't mean they respect them. And this is a negative thing, because if you vote when you love and not when you think, you get what we have.
I have a question. Do you believe that we will have peace and freedom when Russia will collapse as a country? And will you support separatists, for example, of Siberia, if or when Russia collapses as a country, or disappears as a country?
Well, I mean, Russia can lose territories, but Russia will not disappear. And the collapse of Russia is much more dangerous, in fact, for the whole Europe and for the whole world than the war in Donbass. You can love or hate Putin, you can love or hate the situation, the psychology of today's Russians. But I mean, Russia should remain as the country, but it should change the attitude, and the Russians should learn how to be civilized and how to respect the rights of other peoples and other countries. Yes. I mean, any collapse of such an empire will cause other collapses. And then I don't believe there is any geopolitical balance between Russian interests and American interests as it was in the Soviet times, when there was a geopolitical balance and it was almost toppled in Cuba in 1962. But Russians should forget about Soviet past, because I mean the Soviet ideas, the desire to have only one leader, one party, and to trust 100% to this party and to this leader, it will not help Russia to become contemporary, modern, industrial and intellectual state.
I just want to ask you about what is your predictions about in regards to Donbass region?
Well, predictions, I don't have, I would say, rosy vision. I mean, we should understand that a lot of people, and in some places, majority of Ukrainian citizens living on the territory of Donbass, which is under control of Ukraine, they are still pro-Russian. I went to Severodonetsk, which is on Lugansk region on the border with Russia, and I was told that up to 80% of citizens there, they are pro-Russian, they are waiting for Putin to come. When I tried to talk to people in the street, they wouldn't talk to me because I'm a stranger. So the only people who could talk to me were children. And I mean, on the main street, Gvardievsky Prospect, I saw a boy, probably 10 years old, in a jacket with a small Ukrainian flag. And I was surprised because I said, are you not afraid to walk alone in the street with this flag? And he said, no, I'm not afraid. All my friends in the school are patriots and all the teachers are separatists. But on the same prospect, there is a Ukrainian cafe opened by a Russian lady who moved from Northern Caucasus to Severodonetsk. The cafe is called Artichok. And when she opens the cafe, she puts two Ukrainian flags on the right side and left side of the door. But she doesn't leave these flags for the night because they will be destroyed by somebody. And some other people who are pro-Ukrainians told me that when they are going to work on the trolley bus in the morning, they always check if there are Ukrainian flags by the entrance of the cafe or not. So, I mean, the situation is more stable now than when I was there 1 year ago. But the country should do more to explain people, to start a public discussion, because yes, you can disagree with them. I mean, they can love Putin, they can love Russian culture, but they should be able to talk about this, and dialogue, even if you have opposite opinions, is something which can help to avoid bloodshed and avoid actually deaths and war. And in this sense, the area of Donbass was never a place of freedom of speech or freedom of expression. There, actually, journalists were killed more often than in the other regions of Ukraine. And people are not used just to discuss issues. And, I mean, there should be a lot of effort put into this, so that not only to tell them that, I mean, they are Ukrainian citizens. They use Ukrainian passports, they get Ukrainian pensions. They don't speak Ukrainian language, but it is not actually the first priority, and it shouldn't be forced on them. I mean, Hungarians, 250,000 Hungarians in Transcarpathian part of Ukraine. They don't speak, many of them, neither Russian nor Ukrainian. But you have to find common language. And common language will help to have a discussion and decide together so that they get their own influence on the future of Ukraine. Because every Ukrainian has his own vision of future of Ukraine. And the country with 45 different images of Ukraine cannot be called stable.
More questions? There's one more.
I was in Ukraine for 2 weeks ago and visited my Don class. And there was a few people that had occupied some area of the place. Who is this people? They was for going towards Russia, but it's some free people or who?
Well, those people who were trying to start the third Maidan, they were representatives of the organization which is called Правые радикальные силы, RPS, Радикальные правые силы, RPS. This is a Ukrainian filial of Russian Revolutionary Organization. So they were not supported in the attempt. So in the end, all the tents were removed, but no people came to join them on Maidan.
More questions?
Well, I think everybody is tired.
So,
Thank you very much for questions and for
Yeah.
your attention. And
yes.
and I hope you will not lose your interest in the Ukrainian situation and in the Ukrainian future, because the more you want to find out, the more you find out, and the better you will understand what is happening.
You have now a possibility to buy books. There are books, the book published now in Danish. The price is 189, and I think we do something